We had just started doing the Dick Van Dyke Show, so he knew who I was. And I said what a fan I was, and I said, I've stolen.
You were a huge fan of Dick Van Dyke, and he knew it. He was a true legend who made the world laugh, sing, and dance for over 70 years. From Mary Poppins to the Dick Van Dyke Show, he was always smiling, always moving, even into his 90s. Amazing. Fans by staying active and upbeat. But now, something has changed. After a recent health update, Dick had to cancel a big appearance, leaving fans heartbroken. At 99, the reality is sinking in. What really happened behind the scenes? Let's look at Dick's journey, the recent scare, and what it means moving forward. Born Richard Wayne Van Dyke on December 13, 1925. In West Plains, Missouri, he was a small-town boy with big dreams. His mum, Hazel, worked as a stenographer, and his dad, Lauren, was a salesman. He didn't grow up in Missouri, though, as his family moved to Danville, Illinois, where Dick spent most of his early life. He wasn't the only one in the family who would enter showbiz. His younger brother, Jerry Van Dyke, also became an actor and even joined Dick later on the Dick Van Dyke Show. Dick had Dutch roots but also carried English, Irish, and Scottish ancestry. One interesting fact is that he's related to John Alden, a man who came to America on the Mayflower. At Danville High School, Dick sang in the choir and joined the drama club, where his love for performing really started. At one point, he even thought about becoming a minister, but acting pulled him in stronger. He dropped out of high school during his final year to join the U.S. Army Air Forces during World War II. Getting in wasn't easy. Dick was too skinny at first and was rejected several times, but he kept trying and was finally accepted. Instead of flying planes, he worked as a radio announcer and later joined the Special Services, where he entertained troops across the U.S. He left the military in 1946. Many years later, in 2004, Dick received his high school diploma. It was a full-circle moment for someone who had come so far from those early days in Danville. And soon, that journey would take him straight into the world of showbiz. After the war, Dick started working as a radio DJ in his hometown of Danville. In the late 1940s, then, in 1947, something unexpected happened. A mime artist named Phil Erickson convinced him to start a comedy duo. They called themselves Eric and Van, the Mary Mutes. They didn't speak in their act. They lip-synced to records and performed mime comedy across the West Coast in nightclubs. By the early 1950s, the duo moved to Atlanta, where they got their own TV show called The Mary Mutes, which featured comedy skits and music. It was a humble beginning, but it taught Dick the ropes of entertainment. Soon after, Dick landed a spot on a New Orleans TV station, WDSU-TV. He started as a solo comedian, and then became the host of a comedy program. He was slowly making a name for himself. In 1954, Dick made his first appearance on national TV on Chance of a Lifetime with Dennis James. A few years later, he also showed up on The Phil Silvers Show and other programs like The Pat Boone Chevy Showroom and The Polly Bergen Show. Then came a lucky break. A friend from the Army, who was now a CBS executive, suggested Dick to the network. That one recommendation led to a 7-year contract with CBS. Around this time, he also worked as an anchorman for the CBS Morning Show alongside Walter Cronkite. Dick later joked in an interview that he had no idea what he was doing as a morning show host. In 1959, Dick made his Broadway debut in The Girls Against the Boys. It didn't last long, just 16 performances, but it gave him the stage experience he needed, and soon after, things started to change. In 1960, Dick was cast as Albert Peterson in the Broadway musical Bye Bye Birdie, starring alongside Chita Rivera and Paul Lynde. The musical had a mixed reception, but Dick's performance stood out. One critic called him likable, while another said the show needed more work. Still, the show went on to win 4 Tony Awards, and Dick took home the Tony for Best Featured Actor in a Musical in 1961. This led to the movie version of Bye Bye Birdie in 1963. Dick wasn't thrilled with the changes in the film. The focus had shifted away from his character to another one, but he still gave a strong performance, and the film did well. Variety magazine praised him, saying, "Van Dyke displays a showbiz know-how far more extensive than his television outings." Communicate. Then came the role that made him a household name, The Dick Van Dyke Show, from 1961 to 1966. Dick played Rob Petrie, a comedy writer for a TV show. The series was created by Carl Reiner, who first wanted to play the lead himself. But CBS didn't agree, and Reiner picked Dick for the role. The cast was filled with talent. Rose, Marie, Maury Amsterdam, and Mary Tyler Moore, who played Rob's wife, were all part of the team. Viewers loved the show. Critics praised Dick's physical comedy and timing. One review said his drunk husband bit was a masterpiece of timing and ingenuity. Dick won 3 Emmy Awards for his role, and the show itself won 4 Emmys for Outstanding. Comedy series. The show was praised for blending workplace and home life in a way that felt fresh and real. Entertainment Weekly later said the show moved with the same smoothness and grace that Dick and Mary showed on screen. In 2004, the cast came back together for the Dick Van Dyke Show Revisited, a special hosted by Ray Romano. It was a tribute to the show that had launched Dick's career into the sky. But his stardom wasn't limited to television. In 1964, Dick joined the world of Disney as Bert, the chimney sweep in Mary Poppins. He also played Mr. Dawes Sr., the old bank manager, and for that second role, he wore heavy makeup and was credited under a fake name, Nav Kincaid. If you rearrange the letters, it spells Dick Van Dyke. But not everything was smooth sailing. Dick's British accent in Mary Poppins has become famous for the wrong reasons. In a 2003 poll by Empire magazine, it was voted one of the worst film accents ever. Dick later said that his accent coach was Irish and wasn't any better at it than he was. Nobody on set corrected him. Still, the movie was a massive hit. One of the songs, Chim Chim, Cherie, even won an Oscar, and Dick, along with Julie Andrews, won a Grammy for the film's soundtrack. Throughout the 1960s, Dick acted in several more comedy films. Some didn't do so well, like What a Way to Go, Fitzwilly, and Divorce American Style. But in 1968, he found success again with Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. He played Caractacus Potts, this time using his natural American accent. The film had the same songwriters and choreographers from Mary Poppins, and it became a beloved classic for families. Dick Van Dyke had made his mark across stage, TV, and film. From small-town roots to international fame, he kept growing with each step. After becoming a household name as Rob Petrie on The Dick Van Dyke Show, Dick Van Dyke continued to shine in both television and film. From the late 1960s to the early 1990s, he remained a familiar face across America and Canada. His role in Mary Poppins as Bert was unforgettable, even if the accent was famously mocked. In fact, he was nominated for a Golden Globe for that very performance. But there was more. He starred in Bye Bye Birdie and Chitty Chitty Bang Bang and took a more serious role in the comic in 1969. He also appeared in Dick Tracy in 1990 and voiced Mr. Bloomsbury in Curious George in 2006. Then came a fun turn. As the museum villain Cecil Fredericks in Night at the Museum, a role he revisited in the sequels. And let's not forget his guest roles. In the 1970s, he appeared on Columbo and The Carol Burnett Show. Then came the new Dick Van Dyke Show, which ran from 1971 to 1974. Even in his later years, Dick Van Dyke was full of surprises. In 2010, he recorded a children's music album called Rhythm Train. He teamed up with Red Hot Chili Peppers, drummer Chad Smith, and singer Leslie Bixler. On one track, Dick even rapped, a fun moment that showed how playful he still was. Then, in 2017, he did something even more unexpected. He released a jazz album. It was his first solo album since 1963, called Step Back in Time. The album featured songs from the 1920s, 30s, and 40s. He worked with talented musicians like Bill Bixler and Dave Innes to bring old classics to life with a big band sound. He also recorded a duet that Christmas with actress Jane Lynch. The song We're Going Caroling was released digitally and became a sweet holiday treat for fans. But one of his most touching comebacks was in 2018 when he appeared in Mary Poppins Returns. This time he played Mr. Dawes Jr., the son of the old banker character he had played back in the original film. His brief scene brought nostalgia, joy, and even tears to longtime fans. During the production of WandaVision, Marvel producers turned to Van Dyke himself for advice. They wanted to understand how to capture the feeling of classic sitcoms like The Dick Van Dyke Show, and they went straight to the source. Despite some stumbles in Hollywood, like his not-so-great British accent in Mary Poppins, Van Dyke handled it all with humor. In 2017, while accepting an award from BAFTA, he joked, "I appreciate this opportunity to apologize for inflicting on them the most atrocious Cockney accent in the history of cinema." And then he laughed. "I was working with an entire English cast, and nobody said a word." Even his mistakes became part of his charm. In 2023, at 97 years old, Dick Van Dyke made headlines again, this time in a completely unexpected way. He became the oldest person ever to compete on The Masked Singer. Disguised as Gnome, he was the first contestant to be unmasked in Season 9. But the moment was unforgettable. When he revealed himself, the crowd and judges stood up and gave him a long, loud applause. And before walking off the stage, Dick sang a bit of Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious, a reminder of the joy he's been spreading for decades. The same year, it was announced that Dick would appear in a few episodes of Days of Our Lives, and in December 2023, CBS aired a special tribute called Dick Van Dyke, 98 Years of Magic. The event celebrated his life, his work, and his lasting place in American entertainment. But he wasn't done yet. In December 2024, Van Dyke showed up in a music video for Coldplay's song All My Love. He didn't just star in it. He produced the video alongside his wife, Arlene Silver. It was yet another example of how he never stopped creating, even at an age when most people have long stepped away from the spotlight. Through highs and lows, movie flops and TV hits, Dick Van Dyke always stayed true to himself. And with every step, he kept proving that joy, talent, and kindness don't have an age limit. Speaking of which, Dick Van Dyke's personal life has been as full of color as his career. On February 12, 1948, he married Marjorie Willett. But this wasn't a private wedding. No, they tied the knot live on a radio show called Bride and Groom, right from the Chapman Park Hotel in Los Angeles. Together, they had 4 children: Christian, Barry, Stacy, and Carrie Beth. Their marriage lasted for decades, but behind the scenes, things were not perfect. In 1976, Van Dyke began a relationship with actress Michelle Triola Marvin. The affair deeply affected his marriage. He later admitted, it left him writhing in guilt. He and Marjorie eventually separated and divorced in 1984. Despite the pain, he stayed with Michelle for more than 30 years until her death in 2009. Then, in 2012, something surprising happened. At the age of 86, Dick married again, this time to Arlene Silver, a makeup artist 46 years younger than him. They had met 6 years earlier at the Screen Actors Guild Awards. It was a quiet but joyful new chapter in his life. Family meant a lot to Van Dyke. His children and grandchildren even appeared with him on Diagnosis, Murder. His son Barry and grandsons Shane and Carrie were often part of the show. In total, Dick has 7 grandchildren, but there have been moments of deep sadness, too. In 1987, his granddaughter Jessica passed away from Ray's syndrome. It was a painful loss. After that, Van Dyke appeared in public service messages to warn families about the dangers of giving aspirin to children. Even as his fame grew, Van Dyke kept close to his faith. He taught Sunday school at his Presbyterian church and was an elder there. He spent time reading religious writers like Martin Buber and Dietrich Bonhoeffer. His spiritual side grounded him even while he entertained millions on screen. But one scary moment in 2013 showed just how fragile life can be. On August 19, 2013, Van Dyke, then 87, was driving along the US 101 freeway in Calabasas, California. Suddenly, his Jaguar caught fire. Flames grew fast and smoke poured out. But thankfully, a stranger saw what was happening and rushed in to help. The passerby pulled Van Dyke from the burning car just in time. Dick wasn't hurt, but the car was destroyed, burned down to its frame. Even with such a close call, Van Dyke stayed calm and thankful. The incident reminded everyone how quickly things can change, even for a legend. But not long after that, he would face a more mysterious and troubling health problem, one that had no clear answers. For years, something was bothering Van Dyke, and it wasn't going away. It wasn't visible, but it affected his life in a major way. It all started with a strange sensation in his head. Dick Van Dyke had always been full of life, but starting in his 80s, he began to suffer from something strange, a pounding in his head that happened every time he lay down. It didn't feel like a regular headache. It was more like a heartbeat pulsing inside his skull, and it didn't go away. He tried to find answers. Over the course of 7 years, he went through every test doctors could think of. CAT scans, Mr. Is, spinal taps, but everything came back normal. No diagnosis, no clear cause. In April 2013, Van Dyke turned to social media for help. He tweeted, "My head bangs every time I lay down. I've had every test come back that I'm perfectly healthy. Anybody got any ideas?" The response was immediate. Fans shared support, stories, and advice. Some said they'd experienced similar symptoms. Others just offered kind words. But it wasn't just uncomfortable. It was affecting his life. Van Dyke had to cancel several public appearances. A report from USA Today said doctors advised him not to fly. Without proper sleep or relief from the pounding, he had no choice but to rest at home in Malibu. Fans were worried. This was someone who danced on rooftops in Mary Poppins, who performed with endless energy, and now he couldn't even travel because of the pain. It felt like a turning point, one where everyone began to wonder if the joyful, lively Van Dyke we all knew was slowing down. But then came a twist. In May 2013, after years of suffering and dozens of tests, Dick Van Dyke finally believed he had found the cause of his problem, his dental implants. He tweeted, "It seems that my titanium dental implants are the cause of my head pounding." It was a surprising answer, but it also made sense to many. Others responded with their own stories. Some said they too had pain linked to implants or metal in the body. What seemed like a mystery for years now had a reason, though it came at a cost. But even while dealing with pain, Van Dyke didn't stop smiling, and he didn't stop performing either. In 2018, at the age of 92, he returned to the big screen in Mary Poppins Returns. He played Mr. Dawes Jr., the son of the very same banker he portrayed in the original movie. And in a moment that shocked the audience, he danced. He jumped up on a desk and delivered a full routine. Later, he told People magazine, "I got to jump up on a desk and do a dance number." It surprised everybody, but nobody was as surprised as I was. We did several takes of it, and I was just amazed, and I enjoyed it, of course. At an age when most people are far from the spotlight, Van Dyke was dancing, acting, and inspiring a new generation. And in 2023, he did it again, appearing on The Masked Singer as Gnome. When he sang When You're Smiling, the judges and audience were left speechless. When asked why he chose that song, he said, "We picked out one which typifies me." It was his wife who had helped him choose it. And once again, the world smiled with Dick Van Dyke. But even joy has its limits. In late 2024, more challenges arrived. During the California wildfires in December, Van Dyke was forced to evacuate his Malibu home. He later said, "I was trying to crawl to my car. I had exhausted myself. I couldn't get up. 3 neighbors came and carried me out." Thankfully, his home survived, but just weeks later, in January 2025, he had to leave again, this time because of the Palisades fire. Still, through it all, Dick Van Dyke keeps moving forward. He's sober after years of struggling with alcohol. He once checked himself into a hospital in 1972 and worked hard to get better. He also used to smoke heavily, but later started using nicotine gum to stay away from cigarettes. No matter the challenge, whether it's fire, illness, or personal pain, Dick Van Dyke has faced it all. And somehow through it all, he keeps dancing, he keeps smiling, and he keeps giving the world a reason to smile with him. But recently, he opened up about something most people try to avoid: death at 98. Dick Van Dyke is still full of life, but he's also fully aware that his time may be near. In December 2024, during a director's cut of Coldplay's music video, All My Love, he made a bold and honest statement. "I am acutely aware that I can go any day now, but I don't know why it doesn't concern me. I'm not afraid of it." These words came with no fear, just peace. The video was shot at his home in Malibu and was made to celebrate his upcoming 99th birthday. It was filled with special moments, photos of his family, treasures from his long career, and a lot of love. Dick shared what made his life so joyful. "I got to do what I do, play and act silly." And while he laughed and danced, he also grew emotional. He spoke about love with his wife Arlene Silver and what it means to care for someone else as much as yourself. Love is certainly the feeling of caring about the welfare and the life of the other person as much as you care for yourself. In the video, he joined Coldplay's Chris Martin at the piano and sang along. His favorite lyric from the song was, "Until I die, let me hold you if you cry." But even during such deep moments, Van Dyke's humor still showed up. When asked to close his eyes and think about all the people who had meant something to him, he joked, "I'm too old for this. I'll pass out and go to sleep. I'll take a nap." He may be near 100, but his spirit refuses to grow old. In May 2025, Dick Van Dyke shared another personal truth. He admitted that living this long hasn't been easy. During an emotional podcast interview, he spoke about losing close friends, especially fellow actor Ed Asner, who died in 2021. They had once hoped to work together again on a remake of The Odd Couple that never happened.